Yesterday at 6:20 a.m., I asked, am I the a-hole for not offering to care for my unwell ex-husband? I, a 56-year-old female, have been married to my wife Angela, also 56, for a year, and we're planning our first anniversary celebration with a trip overseas. I was very excited to spend this time with my wife, but unfortunately, my ex-husband Dan's recent hospitalization is putting a damper on my plans. Here's our backstory. I met Dan in college, and we got married shortly after graduation when we found out I was pregnant. At the time, it felt like the right thing to do, but looking back, it was a bad idea. I resented having to put my career aspirations on hold in order to be the full-time caregiver, and Dan resented having to be the main financial provider. However, this did not stop him from constantly bringing it up whenever I asked him to help with the kids or the home. He also never defended me when his mother would stop by unannounced, and the household wasn't up to the Queen's standard. I felt so exhausted and trapped, and if it weren't for my kids, Junior, 34, Sarah, 32, Michelle, 29, and Mike, 29, I would have left years ago. Unfortunately, Dan did not have the same values as me and blindsided me with divorce papers. It was a rough process, but after the first year of our divorce being finalized, I got my groove back. Within the next 4 years, I was able to get a nice apartment and a good career. Fast forward to today. A couple of weeks ago, Dan was rushed to the hospital. While the doctors were able to save him, his health took a turn for the worse. His wife is now essentially working to provide for their kids, while her parents watch them to save on daycare. I learned all of this through my children, as I do not care to have any direct contact with Dan. But almost every time I talk to them, they always bring up how stressed and tired they are over having to look after their father. I thought I was just being a sympathetic ear, but a couple of days ago, my children came together to confront me about my lack of willingness to offer assistance to their father. They believe, as their mother, I should want to care for him to make their own lives easier. My children know that while I have a full-time job, I can make up my own hours. They want me to come into his house at least twice a week to make sure he's clean and fed, or pay for a nurse to come do it. I refused, stating that Dan and I have been divorced for years, and that their stepmom can handle that. That's when they told me that she didn't care about their dad like they do, and is most likely hoping for him to pass so she can collect on his insurance policy. As the legal wife, my daughter Sarah then began to cry and ask me if I cared whether or not she had a dad anymore. While Junior and Mike thought that I was being bitter, Michelle asked me to put them first and that I can reschedule my anniversary trip with Angela. My former in-laws are also calling me to say that I need to do this and that I'd be a horrible mom. Am I the a-hole? No. You're not the a-hole, and your adult children are being ridiculous. You divorced Dan years ago. That's the day your commitment to him ended. He married somebody else who's supposed to be there in sickness and in health. So, if your children have a problem with that, they should be talking to her. Now, if she refuses to do anything, then they should be able to step up. No, we're not talking about toddlers or teenagers. We're talking about adults that range from the ages of 34 to 29. So, I'm guessing what's happening here is that they don't want to take care of their dad either, and it's easier to try to guilt-trip you and rearrange your plans than them actually stepping up. No, you are not the a-hole, and when you go on your trip, send him a postcard. And what do you guys think? What is your judgment? Let me know in the comments section. And now, let's check out the community comments. Candyland Canada says, not the a-hole. It's genuinely sad how little your children and former in-laws care about your happiness. It must have been very difficult for you to hear those selfish words from your own kids. It raises the question as to whether anyone ever took your part during the marriage or its dissolution. Dan is not your problem. His wife and their children are not your problem. Your kids are all fully functioning adults who need to put on their big girl and big boy panties and deal with this situation on their own. Go with Angela. Perhaps the time together will help you to heal from the hurt caused by the insensitive and demanding people back home. At the very least, it will reinforce that you made the right choice by starting a new life with her. Dr. Siegel says, not the a-hole. You have literally no legal or moral obligation to provide care for this man. He is not a part of your life anymore. Your paths diverged to the moment he handed you divorce papers. You have both moved on and remarried. It sucks for your children that they might be losing a parent, but giving them any more than emotional support and a shoulder isn't your responsibility. Also, No one mentions here how Dan would feel about you coming back into his life to take care of him. It might not be something he even wants. His side of the family should be doing more to help, not expecting you to step up for them. Also, I would imagine you giving in and doing this will cause a rift between you and your wife. I doubt she signed up to share your commitment with your ex. Coco Snee says, not the a-hole. Turn this completely around and ask your children, how long are you supposed to put your life on hold? And are you never allowed to be happy and live your life? Tell your children that between the four of them and the ex-in-laws, they can split the costs of a hired nurse or healthcare professional or domestic aid to go to their father's house twice a week. Why should you pay for this care? You don't have the bandwidth and mental strength to be their father's carer. And it's really manipulative and cruel of them to emotionally coerce you to become your ex's carer. And responds, Dan's parents are retired and rely on him to pay their bills. I'm told that Dan's wife freaked out at the mention of having his parents move in to help save money. His mom's mobility isn't great, so it's not like she can do all the cooking and cleaning. Also, my kids have student loans, and most of them are parents themselves, so money is tight for them to hire a good domestic aid. They said they don't have the money, and that's why they currently take turns, but it's getting to be a lot for them. Additional information from Ops comments. From what my children tell me, Dan's wife moved him out of their shared bed. She doesn't help him with his medication, takes the food to his room, but won't cut it up into small pieces so it's easier for him to eat, and leaves it on the other side of the room to motivate him to move. She doesn't take him to his appointments, and unless my children, usually my daughters, come by, he's not kept very clean. My children say that Dan has limited mobility and can't verbally communicate like he once did, but the doctors have hope that he'll be able to regain most of his functions if they stick to the plan. They have talked to her, but she just lashes out at them, saying she's too busy with her new job and being the only parent to her kids. It got to the point where she temporarily banned my children from entering the home for a few days until they apologized to her. Right now, my kids are taking turns caring for him, but they all live about 40 minutes to an hour away, while I live about 20 minutes. Most of my kids have children of their own, and their partners aren't happy about their lack of effort with their own kids on a currently undetermined amount of time. My children are bringing him food and feeding him, giving him his medication, and making sure he's clean, and taking him to his appointments. At least, that's what they tell me. If I'm being honest, I don't think I can entirely blame them because I had a people-pleaser mentality that's taking me a few years of therapy to unlearn. So, I feel like that's where my kids get their entitlement from when it comes to me. I don't resent my kids for wanting to take care of their dad. I'm upset at them trying to get me to help them take care of him. Finally, about my in-laws, they think I baby-trapped their precious baby boy because I didn't want to work, so they were happy when he left me. They felt as if he deserved better, and even accused one of my children of not being his because they didn't look enough like him. Alright, well, the community agrees that Opie is not the a-hole, and it's basically the same argument. Dan and Opie were divorced, so it's no longer Opie's responsibility to take care of them. It's the new wives, and at most, the kids, which apparently are having issues with their own partners about how much time they're taking care of their dad. So now let's move on to the update to see how this story ends. I got a few messages from people asking for an update, so I thought I'd share. First, a few people seem to be confused, so let me be clear. I am a woman who is married to another woman. My own parents passed away years ago, so their opinion is irrelevant. My wife and I both have children from previous relationships, but we didn't meet until after our children were adults. So, my wife and I are the only ones who have lived together. Now, on to what almost everyone else cares about the most. I went on a cruise, and it was great. My wife and I had a really great time. My children, predictably, were unhappy, and I'm sure that my temporary blocking of them didn't make it better. Most of my children kept calling and telling me that I was a selfish and awful woman for choosing to go on vacation instead of being there for the family. But, like many of you have stated, I reminded them that their father divorced me, and therefore my obligations to him ended. I told them that if it were any of them that had a medical need, I would cancel without question, but I would not for their father. I thought I could leave it at that, but because they kept calling and texting the first 3 days of the trip, that's when I decided to block them. Unfortunately, my ex's health took a turn for the worse, and he had to go back to the hospital. His lack of proper care triggered an investigation. I didn't know any of this until I unblocked my kids the day I got back. Some of them blamed me anyway. I've come to the conclusion that they're all just mad at the situation, and I'm a convenient villain. I have accepted this because I can understand the fear and anger of facing the idea of losing a parent that you love. I just hope that one day we can all sit down with a family therapist and mediate the situation. However, this did start to trigger my past tendencies of sacrificing my own happiness and well-being for my children. But my wife, therapist, and even a small piece of my inner self had to remind me that my children are adults, and that my ex isn't my responsibility. I try to reach out, and so far, most of my children aren't talking to me, and have made it clear that I will not be able to see my grandchildren as a punishment. It's sad not to see the grandkids, but I'd be lying if I didn't say my stepdaughter's children aren't easing the feeling. It helps that they're very loving and welcoming to me. I'm still wrestling with the guilt and doubt, but my wife and stepchildren are being very supportive. While my other family is a mix, most of my friends are neutral. Also, my wife and I have actually put plans in place if or when we need that type of help. Stuff like savings accounts, short-term and long-term disability insurance, regular doctor's appointments, etc. Well, OP, I am truly sorry the way your kids are behaving with you. What they're doing is not fair, but it is their stupid decision to do it. Hopefully, like you say, someday you are able to sit down with them and mediate the subject. But in the meantime, here's wishing you and your wife the best in the future. Take care, OP, and thank you for sharing. Now let's move on to the next post that also has an update. Am I the mighty a-hole for locking my office and renting a house while my in-laws visit? I work from home, and I think it is a fairly simple concept that most of us at least learned about during COVID. My wife and kids understand that when I'm working, I am to be treated like I am not there, except in case of emergency. My kids are 6, 8, and 12. They are all able to grasp the idea. My father-in-law, his wife, and their kids visited us last week before back to school. They have stayed with us before, and they do not understand what work from home means. His wife is a bimbo who married him for his money, so I can understand her. Her kids share her DNA, so there's that. My father-in-law owned his own business, though he seemed intelligent until my wife's mom passed away and he got remarried. They constantly knock on my door or try to barge in. All of them did this last time they were here, and the last straw for me was the emergency of their ball going over the fence and wanting me to call the neighbors to get it back. My wife will not stand up to her dad, so this time, I just locked my office and rented a flat for their visit, not for them. My wife wouldn't like that, but just for me to have an uninterruptible place to work. It means I have to leave my wife with the kids and guests from when I leave until I get home, but I think it's worth it. My wife thinks I was an a-hole to abandon her for the week. I think it was just logical. I was only about 10 minutes away in case of an emergency. No, of course you're not the a-hole. What would it look like if you didn't work from home and actually worked in an office or outside of the house for whatever it is you do? I don't know, a travel salesman or whatever. Would your wife say the same thing, that you abandoned her? No, because you were just going to work. Working from home is the same thing, and apparently your family treats you that way. It's like you're not there unless it's an emergency, which is absolutely logical. The fact that your in-laws don't respect that, and your wife refuses to stand up to her dad, well, she needs to deal with that, not you. You need to get to work. What is your judgment? Let me know in the comments section. And now, let's check out the community comments. Realistic Head 4279 says, not the a-hole. Too bad this was necessary, but it seems that they all did not respect your need to be uninterrupted during your work hours. I think you handled the situation perfectly, and it appears without malice. Finally, Tuned Raider says, as someone who works from home in my own business, so my office is at my home. I see this as a very reasonable compromise with people who don't understand that just because you're home doesn't mean you're available. If I were you, I'd make it clear to your wife that you didn't abandon her. You went to work, the work that provides for your family. If you had stayed at the flat 24/7, then she would be justified in her accusation. But your solution is no different than you going into the office or a co-working space to get your work done without her family interrupting you. Not the a-hole Forger says not the a-hole your wife can only blame herself for creating these conditions for you to work and not be able to resolve anything. You did the best thing by removing yourself from this environment and showed your wife that if she doesn't want to stand up for you, then she can handle it on her own. But your wife will never change. I would tell my in-laws, if you bother me from 9 to 5, then you will be kicked out and never invited back into my home. I don't play games. You either respect my work or you're out, and personality tree says so. Your spouse and your kids are 100% prohibited from interacting with you. It sounds like your wife is a single parent because she and your children inconvenience you. Is your wife able to carry out every household task without her partner? Is she ever interrupted or inconvenienced being a single parent all day? Op responds, how often do children interact with parents that work outside the home? For example, my buddy is a heavy-duty mechanic. He works on the big tractor-trailer rigs. How often do his children come to see him while he's underneath a truck? Is his wife also a single parent? My mother was a teacher. Did that make me an orphan during the school day since I couldn't just go see her at her school or my dad at his job? Well, the overwhelming majority understood what OP was trying to say and deemed him not to be the a-hole, except for this last comment that I read. And I really liked OP's response, anyways. Let's move on to the update to see how this story ended. First, I accept the criticism of the people who said I was an a-hole for calling her a bimbo. Realistically, she is more of an opportunistic gold digger. Secondly, my father-in-law is well off, but my wife and I are doing well too. Our home is okay, and out-of-town visitors often stay with us because of our location. I guess you would call them amenities. Lastly, my wife has agreed, after reading some of the responses, that dealing with her father is not my problem. She spoke with him and made it clear that they couldn't stay with us because they can't comprehend work from home. Thanks again, everyone. Well, problem solved. Fantastic. So now let's finish this with a mood booster post. This was from a few years ago while working in an assembly line for food. We used to get orders that we would make up for distribution, for example, 1,000 lasagna microwave meals, 800 bologna, etc. As all the products were perishable, we tried not to overfulfill the orders at all, as the chances of us being able to place elsewhere were slim due to the time factor. I led one of the lines, and one day I get the order through at 10 times its usual volume. I go to speak to the boss to double-check, and he turns on me, asks if I am incompetent, and tells me to just get the crap done. Okay, boss, whatever you say. We usually process about 4 different lines a day, and when he came for his check around halfway through the shift, that was when crap hit the fan. It was then he realized there was a mistake, and we had overproduced the order by 5 times. At that point, there was nothing he could say but to move on to the next line. He had to eat a huge loss on his figures for waste. It was glorious. Well, you were told to get crap done, and you did. Maybe he paired that huge loss on his figures with some lasagna.